Hello, and welcome to Emmanuel's podcast on mental health. My name is Dee. Thank you guys for joining us. And today we're going to delve into a topic that most people are very familiar with, and that is the topic of grief. Today I have a special guest with me, and her name is Amanda Hall, affectionately known as Mandy, and she is going to use this space to share a very personal experience that she's had with grief and loss. So, welcome, Mandy.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Could you just start off just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Mandy, as you said, AKA. Most people do know me as Mandy. I attend here at Emmanuel, have been here for almost 3.5 years, and I'm a full time real estate agent. I work for a nonprofit, and I live in Seaford, Delaware. I drive 35 minutes to come to church every Sunday, and I'm just honored to be here and share in your new podcast.
Thank you. And again, we're excited to have you here. And so, as you heard me say earlier, the topic that we're going to delve into today is about grief and loss. So, tell us about that moment and time in your life that was changed because of a very personal experience that you had with grief.
Sure, sure. Um, and I guess we're just going to go ahead and get started here. In 2011, as you know, and I've shared with you, I suffered a tragic loss. I lost my 23-year-old son, and 3 weeks later, I lost my mother. So I think that is probably the biggest thing I could ever attach to grief and loss,
Hmm.
probably more so than I would like to.
Okay. And so when we talk about grief and loss, there's so many different ways that individuals are impacted and people grieve differently and experience grief differently. Can you let us know how did grief manifest itself in your life physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
Ooh, physically. Well, I really don't want to relive that day, but physically, I think for me, because I'm a type of person that holds things in, I think I thought I was okay for a long time, and it ate at my internal being, and I ended up having to go to the doctor, and they had to treat me because I didn't realize the damage that my body suffered through that, through the loss, and emotionally, I was just sad all the time, kind of almost in a cloud, just walking around like literally in a cloud.
Hmm.
And what was the other one? Physically,
Spiritually, how did grief
spiritually.
manifest itself?
So spiritually, I think I don't know if I don't want to say I got distant with God because I really didn't. I have to honestly say, if it wasn't for God, I don't even want to know the space I would be in.
Okay.
So I can say that that is what saved me from like I thought I was okay, but I
Hmm.
wasn't. I was spiritually okay, but my insides, my physical body was really suffering, so yeah.
So, and physically, when you said your body was suffering, was it actual like physical aches and pains that you were feeling,
No, I
or
think things were not working. Like
okay?
it, the doctor had likened it to. She says, "I think that you are so used to keeping things together
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't realize you're. It was like you stuck your finger in a light socket, and it shocked your whole insides. And it's like she likened it to having an open cut, and it doesn't heal until it heals from the inside out. And
Mm.
so they kind of made me take some antidepressants for a while, and I fought her tooth and nail because I didn't want to do that. I was always like, no, God will heal me. And she said sometimes God, uses us to help you through these kind of,
Mm-hmm.
tragedies, because
Mm-hmm.
losing a child's not something that we're normally built for.
Exactly. It's a very traumatic experience. We don't think that our children are going to go before we
Yeah.
do. And so you mentioned, kind of leading into my next question, how did you manage and cope with those changes that you were going through physically, emotionally? You stated that you didn't want to do medication, but I guess your provider, your prescriber
Hmm.
encouraged you. What changed your mindset about the medication piece?
Well, I think that particular doctor, I'd actually gone up to John Hopkins, and I really trusted her. She really listened, and it sounded like she had not just listening from a doctor's perspective,
Hmm.
but it was great because she was a spiritual lady and she loved the Lord. So that was really
Made it easy.
helpful for me. And she listened to me. And after explaining everything to me, she made me feel comfortable about taking it. She says, it's not something you need to do forever. She says, but you need it because what happens when you suffer that kind of tragedy, it short circuits everything. And then any little thing that can trigger it, it just makes the healing process that take that much longer. So I just agreed and went on and took the medicine. So, and I don't think I was on it very long. I'm gonna say probably a year or so, just because I felt better, and I actually came off of it, and then I found myself like in an emotional wreck again, like crying out of
Hmm.
nowhere. So she says you're not ready to come off of it yet. So it was a little longer, and then I finally was weaned off of it.
Sounds like you had a very good relationship with your prescriber
Yes,
who
yes.
listened, you felt heard, validated. He or she explained things along the
Hmm.
process. And so that sounds like that was very critical and that's what you needed
Yes,
at that
and
time.
didn't even realize I needed it.
And I think so many believers sometimes shy away from the medication because they
Mhm.
feel like, oh, the Lord will heal me.
Yes.
The Lord's going to do it. But you can sit here and say, yeah, the Lord does heal.
Hmm.
And sometimes he can use medication for that to be the conduit for the
Exactly.
healing.
I agree. Yes.
Okay.
Because I was one of those people.
Thank you for
Definitely.
being honest about that.
Yeah, I was definitely one of those people. No, I'm not taking any medicine. Yeah.
How else did you manage and cope with some of the, because what I believe is that we all have coping strategies,
Hmm.
right? They can be adaptive or maladaptive, but it's even our maladaptive coping strategies, our unhealthy coping strategies are still coping strategies.
Right.
We're trying to deal with something, in this case, a traumatic loss, something that we're not wired to deal with,
Hmm.
but yet it happens. It's a normal response to
Hmm.
an abnormal situation or
Right.
condition.
Right.
And yet we will sometimes deal with that in unhealthy ways and healthy ways, or sometimes it's a combination.
Right.
So, can you think of any other ways that come to mind on how you managed that?
Okay, I don't want to sound like cliche or anything,
That's
but
okay.
for me, I'm gonna be real honest and
Okay.
transparent because I could have jumped into substance abuse, I could have jumped into anything reckless, if you will, but I can honestly say that if it wasn't for God, that was my counselor. I don't know, I just don't know how I could have done it. That was my coping, is
Okay.
to go before God daily and to push in and press in even when there's parts of you just going, I don't want to, but I
Hmm.
did. And the more I did, the more I came through and the more I coped.
Okay. So, your faith and your belief in God was your
Yeah,
firm foundation.
absolutely.
It was that foundation that everything else stemmed from. So, it sounds like
Hmm.
even though that was your foundation, that you
Hmm.
still allowed yourself to deal with grief.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes people think that, oh, I'm a believer and I believe in God. And so I'm not supposed to grieve or I'm not supposed to feel sad for any length of time.
Hmm.
But you can hold space for both things.
Right,
I'm a believer. I believe in God. I have faith in God. And I'm grieving because
right,
grieving doesn't speak. I don't think grieving speaks to your faith or lack of faith. It speaks to your connection and the love that you had for the person
right.
that you're grieving, that
Yep.
loss.
That was where I found my comfort. Even
Hmm.
going through the grieving process and all the levels, I still like my comforter was Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and sometimes, to be honest, there's some people that don't have that firm
Hmm.
foundation,
Absolutely.
and so if people are listening to this and like, wow, that sounds great, but that wasn't my firm foundation, like that's okay.
Right.
Like we're not here to say, oh, if you didn't do it this way, then you're not you're less than.
Right.
Because it's the reality. Some people do turn to
Yep.
substances. Some people do turn to drugs and alcohol, food.
Looking for that
Um,
numbing agent.
Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. Because that leads to the next thing, the stages of grief. And I know a lot of people have heard about the stages of grief, but there are 5 stages of grief: denial, anger,
Hmm.
bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Right.
And basically, even though it's 5 stages, that doesn't mean it's a linear stage. You can start out at stage 1 or 2 and then be at 4
Right.
or be at 4 and then be back at stage,
Right.
2. And so it's not meant to be this linear thing that goes from A to B to C to D to E, but rather a framework that helps us to understand the processes that we go through when we experience grief and loss.
And they come back around sometimes.
Exactly.
Years later, they can come back around where you're like, I thought I was over that. I thought I was good, but there could be a trigger, that'll bring
Mhm.
it all back up really, like right in
Mhm.
your face, like it just happened.
Did you see yourself in, like, maybe looking back now, did you see yourself or do you see yourself in those stages of grief? Because, like you said, it's not this thing that you experience and then, like, okay, it's one and done. I've been through the 5 stages. Let me pack them up and move on to the next
Right,
thing.
right.
Like, grief is very complex. It's not that
Mhm.
easy because we're complex individuals.
Right.
So, talk to us a little bit about you in those stages of grief.
So for a while, yeah, I thought I did have it together. Of course that initial, denial, thinking, no, this is not happening. This didn't happen.
Hmm.
But I think the main one that sticks out to me is anger.
Mm.
Um, because I talk to people who have gone through the stages and whatnot, and the anger, they get stuck in the anger stage. And I can say that I was angry. I mean, I was angry, and it was the day after. And that's the only time that I can think of that I was in an anger stage. And I literally cried out to God, and I was angry. And I literally told God, why did you take my son? Like, why? Because
Mm.
that's the first thing we wanna know, right? As
Mhm.
a believer,
Mhm.
why'd you let this happen?
Mhm.
And I kid you not, as soon as I spoke those words, I felt a peace come over me and God saying he was never yours in the first place.
Mm.
He was
Okay.
only there for you to oversee. And after that, I was never angry with God anymore. I accepted the fact that it happened and I just went on with it. That was my
Okay.
anger. And
So
it,
you went from the anger
mhm.
a day or so,
A
a
day,
day.
literally the next morning, because the first day I really couldn't process
Mhm.
anything because it was
Mhm.
like Grand Central Station.
Right.
And then the next morning, like everyone was piled in my bed, sleep, the girls, everyone. And I literally got up super, super early before anyone did and snuck out of the house and went back behind my house and was screaming at God.
Mm.
I mean, I'm talking spit flying, screaming. I was so angry. And it was just like I had a peace that came over me I can't even explain. And that was it. And that was the last time I was angry. Then I just kept pouring in. I never backed away from God. Never did I retract and say, let me deal with this or let me get through it or whatever. I still stayed pressing into him.
So it seems like you went like anger to the acceptance.
Hmm. Yep.
And then you said that there are moments that you might cycle back to.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what some of those triggers are or what they were and where it took you back to?
Yeah, so it's crazy. This year was Matt's 13th year. And we had a video of him when, he passed away, and it was his life, and it's crazy because I don't normally look at it, for some reason, don't know what drew me to look at it this year. And I kid you not, by the time I hit play, I felt like the day had happened.
Mm.
Like emotions came out of me that I didn't even think were there anymore. And I just couldn't get myself together for a couple of days. So when you say like you can go back into different stages, I'm like, that's 13 years later.
Mhm.
But something could trigger it, and it was that video, and it was the song that played that I have not heard that song since then. So yeah, I think, but it was a good cry because I felt
Okay.
like it might have been needed.
Okay.
So yeah.
Do you remember what, if anything, that you did to not allow yourself to stay in that moment? You were triggered, you identified it, you recognized what it was.
Just getting it out.
Okay.
Just let it run its course. It
Allowing
was.
yourself to experience the emotion
And
and
I think mainly because in the beginning, when it all happened, everyone always, like I said, Mandy's got it all together. She holds it all together. My daughters were really bad at that time. They wouldn't
mhm.
allow me to be emotional. If I cried, then they would fall apart. So they would always say, Mom, you're always strong. You got to be strong. You can't cry. So I didn't. And through that time, I think there might have been one day, it was on his first year anniversary. I acted like I was getting ready for work, and the kids went off to school. And at that time, my husband went off, and I jumped back in the bed and I cried all day long because I needed to, because I didn't get it out. I really didn't cry at any given time. And
Mhm.
that was when I did. And I think this year was the first time that I've had that experience. So,
Okay. And
yeah.
I think that's so powerful when we give ourselves permission to just be whatever that emotion
Hmm.
is and to experience it and not feel as if we have to put a mask or a facade
Yes.
on to make other people maybe feel better or put them at ease or put them at peace, but yet inside we're suffering.
Yes.
Inside we're crying out, and we feel like we can't be our authentic self in that moment
Yep.
because we maybe want to protect someone else.
Yes. Yes.
So I think if I would want to share with anyone, it would be give yourself that permission. There's no timeline.
Hmm.
I think you said that it was 13 years. There's no timeline for, oh, it's been these many years. Then you
Right.
shouldn't be crying anymore. Or you
Right.
shouldn't be. No. I think that again speaks to the level of love and connection
Yes.
that you had for your son.
Yeah. There are people, I think, that um I'd say if you haven't been there, you don't know. You just don't know until you've lost a child.
Hmm.
And that almost make you feel like, okay, like you said, it's 13 years, get over it, and that's a whole child that all these years have passed and so many things have taken place that they aren't experiencing, and it's sad sometimes when you think about it that they never get to see, their, his sisters get married, my
Hmm.
grandsons, all these things that, but it's fun when we talk about it, because we think,
Okay.
oh, he would have his nephews on the truck with him, so there's fun times in it, and knowing that he was a good brother, good son, he would have been a great uncle.
Hmm.
So,
Just holding on to those memories and allowing
mhm,
yourself as a family and as individuals to share those memories
yes,
and come together around those memories. And there's
yes,
healing in that.
yep,
But sometimes people do shy away from that. Maybe it's too soon.
right,
And I think people know when it's the right time for them.
right,
So what the right time was for you and your family, for another family maybe going through this, might not be the same thing. So I think sometimes we're so quick to say, well, this worked for me, this is going to work for you. Like we want to
right,
give people a script. We want to give people a prescription, 1, 2, 3, do this, and
hmm.
then it's going to be
And the
better.
dynamics, I think, in families, lend to the different type of
Hmm.
loss you feel at those times. And I did state earlier about my mom. In 2011, 3 weeks later, she passed away. So as I was wide open, you know, all my emotions raw. 3 weeks later, my mother passes away, and which was unexpected. So that kind of put me in another, like a cloud, and I was actually very despondent because I couldn't
Hmm.
believe at that point that was getting through this and then my mother. So that whole year was just that's where I think when the doctor when I met with her, that's what she brought up. Do you
Hmm.
understand the loss you've just suffered? She says, do you know that when children go through things, they ask, are you coming from a divorced family? Have you moved? All these things. She says,
Hmm.
you've literally been through all of those. Some people don't even walk through that.
Hmm.
So when she put it like that, I was like, wow, never thought of it like
Kind of
that.
put it in perspective for you.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't even think of it like that ever
Yeah.
because I'm just used to just taking the blows and keep on moving.
And that's what I was about to say. In the short time that I have known you, you seem like you're one of those women that can carry a lot,
Oh,
you do a lot, and you get it done. And that's
yeah.
just not that men don't do that, they might,
Hmm.
but I can only speak from a woman's perspective.
Right.
And that can be a strength of our own.
Hmm.
And at the same time, it can be, I won't say a weakness, but it can be a challenge. It can be a
Yes.
barrier because we're so used to carrying the load. We're so used to bearing the load. We're
Mm.
so used to doing 5 or 10 different things and doing them well
Right.
that when we have a traumatic experience or a grief or loss, then we try to approach that like we would some
Yes.
other things. And it's different. And I think you've said that in many different ways that it's nothing prepares you
Hmm.
for the loss of a child. And then 3 weeks later,
Hmm.
a loss of a parent unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were not meant to do that
Yeah.
alone.
No.
You were not wired to carry that.
And my father was my rock, right,
Hmm.
outside of God, and he was always there for me, support, and then he died in 2013. So that was like another crash and burn for me.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that one I didn't see coming at all because I was
Okay.
like, okay, now he's gone. Now what? So
Yeah. And I think with grief, sometimes people, and I get what they say when they say this, I just want things to get back to normal. Like, did you ever say that or think that? Or I just want things to go back to the way it
mm-mm,
used to be.
mm-mm.
And I know some people do that. They
Right,
they say that, but I've also heard people say you're not going to ever really go back to how things, because your life has been changed.
you're right.
It has
Forever
been
changed.
altered. You
Hmm.
still have the memories, but things are different in that you won't be making new memories, like you
Right,
were alluding to earlier. And so it's kind of like, okay, how do I deal with life from this standpoint
right,
here on out? What is my life going to look like? How do I reconfigure my life as a mom or as a daughter? What is that going to look like?
right.
And it doesn't always come together maybe the way that we want to at first, because it takes time. It
Yeah.
takes time. And so, any other areas that you saw yourself in the stages of grief?
Um,
Did you ever find yourself bargaining? Some people,
no, I don't think so. I
okay.
don't think so. We've got, what do you have? Denial, anger,
Mm-hmm.
bargaining, acceptance. What's the other one?
Depression.
Depression.
Depression. Thank you.
Yeah, I
I,
think so. I think internal depression that I
mm-hmm.
didn't, once again, I think that loops back around to the doctor
Mm-hmm.
where, there it was tied in between the mental and the depression that was going on, which led to me having to take medication.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, with these 5 stages of grief, and there's certain literature you look at, they might say 7, but these are the core 5. And again, it's just a framework to help us to understand a very complicated
Right.
issue or topic: grief and
Right.
loss. And so, with that said, when we go through things, we have our family and our friends. They come over, they give us words of wisdom or words of advice. Were there any things that were said to you that people perceived as being helpful, but it really wasn't helpful? Like, it left you feeling like, why did you say that? I didn't need to hear that. They meant well, but like, this was not helpful at all.
Yep, I can say one word or one thing for that.
Okay.
The biggest issue I think, for whatever the reason, this is me, that
Okay.
bugged me was, I know how you feel.
Mm,
I lost my brother, or I lost
mm,
my mother, and I would just cringe. I'm like, your parents are a circle of life. That's kind of, parents,
mm-hmm.
you. So that would always bug me. I'm like, that, I understand, and maybe they don't know exactly what to say,
Okay.
but I almost felt like that's not a comparison. And I realize you're suffering a loss. Maybe we're dealing with loss, but the loss of a child is a different beast. It
Mm,
it just is.
mm-hmm.
That was just one thing that people would always say. There's certain people that always say, oh, I know I lost my mother or my sister. I'm like, okay, I feel
Okay.
bad for you, but it's not the same.
But for you, again, a very different dynamic, and
Yeah,
didn't find that helpful.
no,
Anything else that people?
no, I didn't really. I mean, everyone was very supportive and
Okay.
empathetic. That was just one of those things that I didn't take well to.
Okay. I
Like,
know I've heard
don't
people.
say it to me.
Well, that's good that you had people that kind of said things that were supportive and helpful.
Hmm.
And again, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. So
Hmm.
I sometimes feel like people are either uncomfortable,
Hmm.
they don't know what to say, or and they're searching for words to say. And then
Right.
some people are just they're well meaning, but so I've heard people say that this kind of makes them cringe. Well, they're in a better place now.
Yeah. No, but they are.
And that's good that but I think in that moment when you're dealing with denial or anger,
Hmm.
and yes, you're a believer, but it's kind of like, okay, but I don't want them in that. I want them here with
Right.
me
Right.
now.
Yeah.
I think when my dad passed away, for example, I don't remember people saying that, but it's kind of like, it's going to be okay. And I'm like, okay, that's not helpful. I know it's going to be okay.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes we're expecting something from people that they really can't truly give us,
Because
but
it's
it's
hard.
hard. And I
Yeah.
think people are trying their best. And there's certain things that will kind of be like that nail on chalkboards when they
Hmm.
say it.
Yeah.
And those are just some of the things that, I've heard people share with me that was a cringe moment for them. They're in a better place now, or, you know, God needed them, and,
Yes, I've heard
versus
that.
you, and just pray about it. It's going to be okay. And those things are true. We pray it's going to be okay. But it's like in that moment, can you at least hear my pain or see my
Right,
pain
right.
or acknowledge my suffering and it be okay?
Mhm.
Like God, He knows that we're sorrowful.
Right,
He knows that we're grieving. In Hebrews, I think it's chapter 4, it says He's our high priest who sympathizes with us,
right,
who knows our infirmities. He sympathizes with the infirmities and the weaknesses that we have. And so we don't have to shy away from Him. Just like you said, you didn't shy away,
mhm,
you drew close to Him because I
right,
think you recognized Him as that Father, as that high priest who you could just come to Him. You don't have to fix it up. You can
right.
come yelling, screaming, spitting, crying,
Mhm,
whatever it is. He can bear it.
right.
He can take it, and He wants to
And
bear it.
people, like you say that, they say these, different things, and I think it comes down to people don't understand.
Mhm.
They don't know what to say. So they say anything,
Mhm.
and they say what they think you want to hear, and that didn't bother me because I understand it's a very uncomfortable thing.
Okay.
And I tell you another thing that did bother me. Um, I have a few people that just didn't even come around, and
Mm.
and it kind of that really tugged at my heart.
Okay.
People that I th- that we were friends, we went to church together, and they didn't come around. And once again, maybe they didn't know what to say, but almost like I felt, which could have been not just me, I felt like I had a plague or something.
Mm.
Like, she lost a child. Like
Okay.
that's what I kind of felt from a couple of people, and I say that only because there's a couple times I've been places and they were in the area and they almost beelined away from me. So I just never knew how to take that,
Yeah.
and you know,
And it sounds like it may have been their comfort level or their lack of comfort in not knowing what to say.
yeah,
Maybe for fear of saying the wrong thing or saying something that could be perceived as insensitive. Because, like I said, grief is complex, obviously, for the individuals that are going through it
right,
firsthand. And it does impact family members, friends, and those on the outer
hmm,
perimeter. So people tend to grieve differently based on the connection that you have with the
right,
person.
right,
And so I'm just wondering if they didn't know what to say, or sometimes people are triggered in their lives by things that we go through
right.
that
Okay,
triggers something in them, maybe.
right.
And again, we don't know.
No, I don't.
So and it's not for you to figure out,
Hmm.
right? So what do you think? And again, in hindsight, would have been, or maybe some advice that you can give for people to say to someone that's grieving that would be helpful, that would be more supportive.
So, I recently have a friend who lost her 18-year-old daughter. Um, and I don't want, I keep saying I don't want this to sound cliche. I really
Mm,
don't.
okay.
But I'm gonna just be honest with you. I've always like, Lord, what, give me the words to say,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to just say something. But these folks that just lost their 18-year-old daughter, it's crazy because it was like a homecoming at church, because Molly grew up in the church, little bitty thing, praise and worshiping when she was just a itty bitty thing. Her organs were all on one side of her, the right side of her body. But anyway, so we all watched her grow up, and she passed away at 18.
Mm.
And it was sudden and everything. And when we got there to the church and I made my way up to the mother and the father, they couldn't wait for me to get there. I didn't say anything, just hugged him, let him say whatever, because she said, he's waiting for me, the father, after I hugged her, and he just cried, and it says in the Bible, rejoice with those who
Mm-hmm.
rejoice, grieve with those who grieve, and that's how my heart is, if it's just a hug, because sometimes you don't always have to hear something.
Mm-hmm.
You just need somebody to be there,
Right.
not even speak. Just some people have an empathetic heart that, you know, but I just never forget. He wouldn't let me go, and he just cried, and he was like, "Mandy, my baby," and he just said and cried and talked, and I was happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I was where I needed to be. So for me, yeah, just hugging, just hugging someone. they don't always need to hear something. They just need someone to hold them, because while we love Jesus and he's our comforter, we still are in our flesh.
Mm-hmm.
We want that physical hug,
Mm-hmm.
that keeps you from falling to the floor. So
Yeah. And I think
that's what I would say anyway.
and when I hear you describe that, what I hear is because sometimes words don't suffice
Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah.
There's just not enough words or the right words, but it's our presence.
Yep.
Our presence can be felt way beyond words.
Yep.
And our presence might be a hug.
Hmm.
Our presence might be visiting someone and sitting with them over a cup of coffee and barely saying anything,
Hmm.
but just being there and
Yep.
being present and being available. Like you
Right.
said, okay, God, I'm not sure what to say or do, but here I am. Use me in the way that you see fit for this
Yes.
person. And I know, for example, I can get in my head and complicate things. Like I want to find the perfect thing to say. I want to find the perfect card.
Yes.
I want
Yes.
to, say the right things and just be so eloquent. But it's not that. It's about being present. And it's not about me.
Right.
It's about being present for someone. And for me to be present with someone, I have to have a certain comfort level with silence.
Hmm.
I have to maybe have a certain comfort level with tears,
Yep.
a certain comfort level even with anger, and
Right.
know that, okay, I'm just here with you. If you need to scream, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
I have to be okay with that as the person that is wanting to be a helper, be support. I can't say I want to give you support, Mandy, but give you support the way I want to give it, right? Or
Exactly.
what's supportive to me. It's about, well, what does Mandy need?
Yep.
And sometimes it's a question of, well, what do you need? Or maybe you can't answer that right now, but let me know what you need,
Yeah.
or
What
how
can
can
I
I
do
help?
for
What can
you?
I do for
Yep.
you?
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes those seemingly easy questions, but sometimes you want to overcomplicate it by what we think we would do if it was
Right.
us. And but we all grieve differently. There is
Yep.
no formula. There is no, manual that says follow these steps and then you're going to come through on the
Yep.
other
Exactly.
side. This next question, I think you answered it. Was there a moment when you thought, God, why? And you answered that in the
Hmm.
beginning, that you had that moment.
Yep.
And were you ever taught that you couldn't ask God why? Was that something you were ever taught?
Mm.
Yeah, because that was something I grew up with. Like, don't
Okay.
question God.
Well, yeah, I have heard that,
Yeah, like,
and
don't
it
question
wasn't that
God.
at all. It was just the
Yeah.
moment that I did, I had peace that, you know, why? I mean, at the end of the day, children are brought here,
Mm-hmm.
and we're to be, raise them in the admonition of the Lord, and grow them up like that. So I felt that at that time, I that's what I did,
Yeah.
and I did. I actually thanked him for allowing me to have him for the 23 years that I had him.
Yeah.
So,
And so your perspective early on, it seems like, was that he belonged to the Lord.
hmm.
Again, doesn't mean that you hurt any less,
Right.
but you had that perspective. And so I think it's important for people to know that, not everyone does have that perspective. And if you don't, like, that's okay. Again,
Right, exactly.
you want to surround yourself with people that are going to help you through this process. And if you're not there yet, or if you're still questioning, then talk to someone about that. Bring it to God in prayer. Like, he wants to hear what you have to say. You're not going to offend God by saying, God, why this? Or I don't understand.
Right.
And I think that's okay. But I know many of us were taught that, oh, don't question God. You're not supposed to do that. And we know God is sovereign.
Mhm.
We know God is sovereign. But there's some things that we just want to understand, and we might not get that understanding.
Mhm.
And God will help us through that process.
But even people that lose people that don't know God,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you really, think about this, if you ask them, they're angry with God.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they don't know God or
Exactly.
have a relationship, they're mad at
Exactly.
God. So to me, what I could say to people like that, if you're mad at God, then go to God.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them, and that
Mm-hmm.
could be the whole change in the
Mm-hmm.
whole picture. But
Mm-hmm.
they're mad, when they fall into abuse, like some kind
Mm-hmm.
of substance abuse.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing? They're angry at God.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I'm like,
And that's a
try
common
it.
theme. That is a
Yeah.
common theme. And I think as someone that, maybe we're trying to offer support for someone
Hmm.
that is in that phase of questioning and anger, maybe our response be like, oh, don't question God.
Hmm.
Maybe our response is a little bit more gracious and a little bit more understanding of, I can see why you might be angry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's pray about that. Or when you're ready, or if you want to pray,
Right.
go to God with that instead of saying, "Oh no, don't do that."
Mm-hmm.
No, allow them to talk about wherever they're at in this process,
Exactly.
because that opens the door for conversation. If someone is going to say, "Oh, don't be questioning God," well, that to me shuts the door
Right.
for a
Yeah.
conversation. You kind of have closed the door, and there's not too many places that maybe you can go from there.
Right.
Because again, God is His sovereign. He can bear it all.
Mm-hmm.
He can
Yep.
bear the questions. He can, like I said earlier, he can bear the tears. And so if that's where you are, that's where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that we don't want to get so overwhelmed in any emotion
Right.
that it overwhelms us to the point where we're stuck in it. And then I think that's when again, seek that professional help or
Right.
seek that supportive friend. Even being, happy, like ecstatic 24/7, we call that mania. Like that's not really healthy either,
Right.
But again, if that's where you are, get the help that, you need, or maybe begin to reach out. Maybe you don't know where to go,
Mm-hmm.
but to reach out and to really give your own self some grace. I mean, like, this is just where I am.
Right. Right.
I don't know
I've
what to
had to do
do.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had to give myself grace. The day that this year, the 13th anniversary, when I
Yeah.
couldn't get it together, and I was like, Mandy, you got to give yourself grace.
Hmm.
You've not really just fallen apart. Just it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So I think maybe the final question, we'll see. So on this journey that you've been on, Mandy, what have you learned about yourself, others, and God?
I've learned about myself that I have broad shoulders,
Okay.
broad shoulders, and about others. Um, that they don't know what they don't know, and the more I've told my story, they understand me and what I've gone through, and it hopefully enlightens them when they cross someone else that may be going through the same thing.
Hmm.
And with God is that He's sovereign. He's sovereign. He's been my rock.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
honestly, I can say he's been my rock. It was a while before I went back to church, but there were some things that we don't want to talk about with church that once all this happened, um, I did get some bitterness because of church. And I was in a Sunday school classroom, and not one of those people in my Sunday school classroom reached out to me. And so
Mm.
when I finally did get back to church a month later, it's a little later than that because 3 weeks I didn't go, then mom, and then I was out 2 more
Okay.
weeks. And we were in Sunday school talking about, we were doing a series on reaching the community and going outside your church walls and blah, 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 blah. Well, I, I just fell apart. Literally. I was like, I'm sorry, what are we doing here? We're talking about the community. You had someone in your church that lost their child that was completely broken and we didn't reach out to, but we're trying to get outside the walls. I said, what does that say about our church? It really did change the trajectory of the church because they really had to soul search and look at themselves and go, wow.
So they heard that. When you said that, they
Yes,
heard that.
yes. And I knew the hurt that I felt. I knew that it had to be controlled by the Holy Spirit or
Mm-hmm.
it would not be anything but Mandy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even go into Sunday school ready for any of that. It just when they talked about trying to reach outside the walls, I'm like, we have people hurting in the church. We have to address that
Mm-hmm.
before we're going to be effective out there. And that was one of those things where we really have to be conscious, like we don't just
Right.
come here to church, right, to just come and have a good time.
Right.
There are people all around us hurting, and if we're not sensitive to the Holy Spirit, we are going to miss those people. And
Exactly.
it could be someone losing their child, it could be a parent, it could be anything, any kind of hurt that might be going
Mm-hmm.
on. And I have prayed in my time that I'm more sensitive to those things where maybe I wasn't always
Right.
sensitive, to those type of things. So far as that's how I can say through all that and with God and my relationship with God, has definitely opened my eyes to more things around,
Yeah.
outside, people hurting, and it's just pierced my heart, more so than it ever has.
It's opened your eyes and you become more aware and more sensitive
Hmm.
to the needs
Yep.
of others. And I think in that way, when we go through grief and loss, that can change us for the good
Mhm.
in a positive way.
Right.
Because our response to grief can either be adaptive
Mhm.
or maladaptive.
You're
Our
right.
response to grief can keep us bitter, keep us harboring anger, unforgiveness, resentment. And again, all those things are natural feelings that we have.
Right.
But when we sit in them and stay in them and camp out and make them our home,
Mm.
then it really does shift our perspective. But if
Yes.
we can, and if we can come to this realization, and only through God and the Holy Spirit, is that God, you're working all things together. I don't
Right.
understand it. I don't mean it's good, but you're working it together
Right.
for my good. You're going to use what I've gone through to help me to reach someone. That's a
Yes.
perspective shift.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that does not happen in your flesh.
Right. And someone had told me prior to that, she had just lost her mother and father. She took care of both of them. And she says, "You are so fortunate, Amanda. You've never lost anyone close to you." And so when I lost my son,
Mm-hmm.
she was stood in my kitchen and said, "I can't believe it." And I just said, "You had never lost anyone and you lost your son." She said, "That's worse than losing my parents." But prior to that, maybe I was that person that didn't know what to say to people because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, I still was the same person, but it just put a different
Your
perspective
perspective
on. Yeah,
changes. Yeah.
absolutely.
And it
So,
sounds like because of your faith in God, because of your belief in Him, and because He is your firm foundation, He was your firm foundation back then, that's what you held on to.
yeah,
That was your life jacket. That was your saving. He was your saving grace.
yes,
He was your everything. Um, and we want to get the message out to people that if they don't have Jesus Christ as their everything, that they too can have Him. It
absolutely.
doesn't mean that things are going to hurt less.
Right.
It's just He's going to be with you through it and
Yeah.
in it. It's
And a
like that's
different coping
exactly,
mechanism. Yes.
exactly. And is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I think you just said it very well. If
Okay.
people have, go through that,
Mm-hmm.
it's available to them. They
Mm-hmm.
have to want it.
Yeah. And it
So,
doesn't come overnight,
no.
it, and this scripture that I found, we were talking about it beforehand, from Second Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 through 4. And I was like, I want to write this down because I want to read the whole thing. And it just, I think, encapsulates what we've talked about here. And it says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from
Yes.
God." And again, and just in that short verse, like comfort, compassion was listed like 5 times.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes when we go through things, or non believers or believers, sometimes they think a certain way about God, but
Hmm.
we're reminded that He is a Father of compassion. He is the God of all comfort.
Yep.
He sees all, He knows all, He cares, and He comforts us. And in return, what we're supposed to do is not just hoard all that for
Yes.
ourselves, but we're to then take that and comfort someone
Yep.
else. And I think that's what you're doing
And I
by,
think in that comforting others,
mm-hmm,
you're actually still comforting yourself,
exactly.
because you're giving what either that you don't have, or when you give it, it reiterates the
Yeah.
peace, because it takes something to give of yourself. So, when you do that, you just kind of, just like when you're learning the word, every time you speak it, you're just feeding yourself all over again. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for
you're
joining me
you're very welcome.
and for being so transparent about, this time of your life and how you dealt with it, how you coped, how you're continuing to cope with it. And thank you for encouraging us that Jesus, He's our foundation. He's our rock. And with Him, all things are possible.
Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.